All right, I'm going to give you an overview of what's referred to as entrepreneurial options for businesses. Now, many of you have already expressed the interest in becoming entrepreneurs, which is great, and that's what America is built on. But you need to be aware of the different pros and cons of the different forms of business that you could be utilizing. The most common is a sole proprietorship. That's where you are it, you manage it, you're personally liable for any screw-ups. Most businesses begin as sole proprietorships. The big problem is liability. Taxation, you're going to be taxed on whatever you make. There's no intermediate level. More difficult to raise money for a sole proprietorship, but the big problem is liability. That's why you'll see with these different forms, it's my opinion that the reason there are statutes that allow for these different forms is to protect you from personal liability. And a lot of people think, well, is that fair? The law allows it, so it's one of the things to be aware of when you're setting up your business. Second type, there are different types of partnerships you'll see discussed. The worst form of business on the planet is probably a general partnership among individuals, 2 or more individuals, because it exposes you to what's referred to as joint and several liability in case one of your partners does something, a contract, a tort, whatever. You all can be sued for it even though you didn't do it, or the victim, the defendant could, or the plaintiff, I should say, can sue, can pick and choose who they're going to sue. So it's jointly or severably liable. So the way to get around that is to set yourself up as a corporation or as a limited liability company, then go into a partnership. You'll see in your book they talk about the concept of joint ventures. Often in some foreign countries they require you to link up with a domestic company or domestic business in a form of a joint venture for a limited project. The best way to do that is to first form yourself or your business as a limited liability company or some sort of corporate entity, which will provide you some insulation to liability. I should say there are other different types of partnerships discussed in your book, limited liability partnerships, as the term would suggest. You have a partnership of a number of people. Some have contributed capital to the partnership. Their liability is limited to that contribution. In those scenarios, limited partnerships or limited liability partnerships, you have at least one partner who's viewed as the general partner. If you're in that scenario, you could obviously set yourself up as a corporation and be the general partner as a corporate entity. These are historically have been used by companies investing in real property, syndicates that want to buy real estate or things like that have used limited partnerships to get investors involved. Again, sole proprietorship, that's a problem in getting capital. Limited liability companies, that's the most popular form. That's essentially the newest form of business set up by statute. Right, so you have to follow certain statutory protocols to get registered with the Secretary of State. This is fairly easy. You go online to Secretary of State's office. You can do it all online. You have to file articles of formation. Then you have an operation agreement with your other members of the limited liability company. Now, a couple of things about limited liability companies. First of all, one person can be a limited liability company. Now, this is somewhat confusing, but the law allows it. You still have to follow the protocol. You have to maintain a separate legal entity. Don't commingle your money. That's bad because a person can pierce the limited liability veil and get to you personally and hold you accountable as if you were a sole proprietor. So when I say sole proprietor, that's really the default. If you screw up on some of these more sophisticated forms of business organizations, you're going to be held personally liable like a sole proprietor. And that's the reason you set up these forms is to limit your personal liability. So in the limited liability company, kind of like a partnership in the sense that easy to operate but limited liability. So you have the ease of operation like a partnership, but you have the limited liability, which is great. So highly recommended I would do it. I suggest that if you are an entrepreneur, you look at doing that one. There's also S Corps and C Corps. S Corps are corporations that have chosen to be taxed in a certain way. This is beneficial if you have employees. You can save a lot of money on employment taxes. So take a look at that. There's a video you'll see on your website comparing limited liability companies and S Corps. Important for you to know. In my business, I'm an S Corp. C Corps are the big kahunas, the McDonald's of the world. Most of us aren't going to be concerned too much about that, other than perhaps as stockholders or investors. Now, important to understand how these are formed, how to maintain them, and their termination. As I said, sole proprietorship, easy to form. You should register with the Department of Revenue if you're selling goods, certainly. And if you're doing business in a local community, you have to register to do business in that community. You got to worry about zoning laws, all kinds of stuff. So registration, licensing, zoning, if you're a professional, obviously have your license. I'm a lawyer, have to be licensed. You have to maintain that. If you too loose, especially with your books, and you commingle your personal with your business, that's a huge problem. Important to terminate the business entity properly. Sole proprietorships, obviously, there's no continuing entity. If you die, it's gone. You can't pass that along. But with partnerships, limited liabilities, etc., important to terminate them properly. There are forms you would file with the Secretary of State's office to terminate the entity. If you don't do that correctly, there's what I call zombie liability. There's ongoing liability you may have that can come back and haunt you, so make sure you do that. Liability taxation is another issue. Big problem with C Corps is double taxation. The corporation is taxed, and the stockholders who own the corporation are taxed on the dividend. So that's like the big downside for corporations. Partnerships and sole proprietorships and also LLCs, the individuals are taxed on the money. There's no double taxation. I talked a little bit about piercing the veil. You hear this, piercing the corporate veil. It's really piercing the veil or the protection of limited liability for any of these forms that afford you limited liability. If you don't maintain the entity, if you don't renew properly, if you commingle your money, you do something like that, and someone sues you, they can pierce the veil and get you individually. So, and that just you don't want to be there to do that, because there's a way to protect your assets. I do want to talk a little bit about about franchises, and I'll have a separate video on this with a franchisor and a franchisee. But this is an option. This isn't really a particular business form, but it is a situation where state and federal law apply. Obviously, the franchise agreement is very important. This is very attractive for a lot of people because it's a situation where the franchisor, the entity that came up with the brand, wants to go out there and open up more stores or sell the product. And there's different types of franchises you'll see discussed in your book, distributorships, things like that. Where the franchisor wants to do business but doesn't know the community or have the resources to do it, so will contract with a franchisee, and the franchisee is licensed to use the brand and benefits from the name and the reputation of the franchisor. And so think of McDonald's, think of those are chain franchises, distributorships like automobile distributorships, manufacturing franchises like Coca-Cola, that kind of stuff. So there are different types of franchises. It's very important you understand the risks of those and the deal you're getting into. And again, make sure you check out the franchisor, the good and the bad, the ugly, to make sure you know what you're getting into. Normally there's a downstroke of thousands of dollars. It can be in excess of $1 million to get in. Then there are the franchisor requires you to buy the product they provide. They take a percentage of your gross or net. So a franchisee essentially is working for the franchisor, even though the franchisee can be an LLC, can be a partnership or whatever. But among concerns that have been raised recently with franchises is the amount of money being paid to the line workers, like in McDonald's, the $15 an hour minimum wage campaign. There are lawsuits involving the McDonald's franchisor and the McDonald's franchisee based on the claim that the McDonald's franchisor exercises control over the worker, even though the worker works for the franchisee. So there are some challenges there for franchises that you need to be aware of, but works well for a lot of people. Make sure you check it out. You can Google best and worst franchises for this year, and you'll see there's a list of some of the best and some of the worst. I always look there if you're looking to be an entrepreneur. It's a good place to get idea what is marketable, what kind of businesses are working, and think to yourself, maybe I can do that. I don't need to be associated or pay a lot of money with a franchisor. It really depends on the circumstances. But check it out.